Chosen one. There is something the enemy whispered over your life during one of your darkest seasons that heaven needs to directly address today. It was not a loud declaration. It did not arrive with dramatic fanfare or obvious announcement. It came quietly, subtly, woven into the fabric of your most difficult circumstances, spoken through the voice of disappointment, through the language of loss, through the feeling of doors closing and dreams fading and possibilities shrinking until the future that once felt expansive began to feel impossibly narrow. The enemy looked at a specific situation in your life, perhaps a relationship that ended, a career that collapsed, a dream that appeared to die, a season of health that deteriorated, a financial foundation that crumbled, or a chapter of your story that closed in a way that left you breathless with grief and confusion. And he called it an ending. He gathered every piece of visible evidence available to him and constructed the most convincing case he could that what you were experiencing was final, that the door had not just closed but had been permanently sealed, that the life you had been building, the future you had been believing for, the promises you had been carrying, were to finish said, "It was doble run. He has always been wrong about you." And today heaven is issuing a direct and irrevocable counter-declaration over everything the enemy called finished in your life. What he called an ending, God is already turning into a powerful new beginning. And that turning has already started. The enemy's greatest lie. To understand the full weight of what God is doing in your life right now, chosen one, you must first understand the nature of the enemy's most persistent and destructive lie. It is not a complicated lie. In fact, its power comes precisely from its simplicity. The lie is this: what is over is over. What is lost is gone. What has ended cannot begin again. What has been broken cannot be made whole. What has died cannot live. This lie sounds like wisdom. It sounds like the reasonable acceptance of reality. It sounds like maturity and practicality and the kind of clear-eyed understanding of life that sensible people are supposed to embrace. And that is precisely why it is so dangerous. Because it disguises itself as truth while it works to steal the most essential thing a chosen heart possesses: hope. When the enemy can convince you that your ending is final, he has effectively neutralized your faith. Because faith, by its very nature, is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not yet seen. Faith requires a future to reach toward. It requires a promise to hold on to. It requires the unwavering conviction that what is not yet visible is nevertheless real and coming. And when the enemy convinces you that the future has been canceled, that the promise has expired, that what is not yet visible will never become visible, he has taken from you the very engine that drives your miracle forward. But chosen one, the enemy does not have the authority to declare endings over lives that belong to God. He can observe, can accuse. He can whisper and suggest and construct elaborate arguments from visible evidence. But he cannot write the final word over a chosen life. That authority belongs exclusively to God. And God has not declared your situation an ending. He has declared it a turning point, a pivot, the precise moment where what looked like a conclusion becomes the most powerful introduction your story has ever known. When endings are actually beginnings in disguise throughout the history of God's relationship with his people. One pattern appears with such consistency that it cannot be ignored or dismissed as coincidence. God has an extraordinary and specific habit of taking what looks like a final ending and using it as the raw material for a beginning that surpasses everything that came before it. Consider the moment when everything Joseph had built in Potiphar's house was stripped away by a false accusation and he found himself thrown into a prison cell with nothing but the clothes on his back and a promise in his heart that suddenly seemed impossible to reconcile with his circumstances. The enemy called that an ending. The evidence supported the conclusion. Joseph's dreams of leadership and elevation appeared not just delayed but decisively destroyed. Yet that prison cell was not a conclusion. It was a corridor. It was the specific passageway through which Joseph had to walk in order to arrive at the position that had been prepared for him since before his brothers ever decided to sell him into slavery. Consider the moment when the disciples stood at the foot of a cross watching everything they had given their lives to follow, everything they had left behind to believe in, everything they had staked their futures on, draw its final breath and go silent. The enemy called that the ultimate ending. He celebrated with everything he had because from every visible and natural perspective, it was finished. The movement was dead. The leader was gone. The dream was buried. Yet 3 days later, the greatest beginning in human history erupted from what the enemy had confidently declared a permanent conclusion. This is the pattern. This is the signature of God moving through human history and human lives. He takes what the enemy calls finished, and he turns it into the starting point of something so much greater that the ending, when viewed from the other side of the new beginning, is recognized not as a loss, but as a necessary transition. Your situation fits this pattern. Chosen one. What the enemy called your ending is not your ending. It is your transition. And God is already at work on the other side of it, building something that your season of loss was making necessary room for. What had to end for the new beginning to have space, there is a truth that is sometimes difficult to receive in the middle of grief and loss. But that becomes profoundly liberating once it settles into the heart with understanding. Some things have to end for greater things to have room to begin. Not because God is cruel or indifferent to the pain that endings produce, but because he sees the full picture of your life from beginning to end, and he understands with a clarity that your finite perspective cannot yet access, that certain chapters must close in order for the most important chapters to open. The relationship that ended may have been comfortable, but comfort is not always the same as destiny. Sometimes God allows the comfortable thing to conclude so that the purposeful thing can begin. The career that collapsed may have been providing income, but provision is not always the same as calling. Sometimes God permits the adequate thing to fall away so that the excellent thing can take its rightful place. The season that closed may have been familiar, but familiarity is not always the same as fruitfulness. Sometimes God closes the familiar chapter so that the fruitful one can begin. This is not to minimize the pain of what you lost. The grief that comes with endings is real, and it deserves to be honored rather than dismissed. God does not ask you to pretend that loss does not hurt or that endings are not difficult. He asks you to trust him through the pain of the ending while he prepares you for the wonder of the new beginning. He asks you to hold his hand through the grief, while his other hand is already at work building what comes next. What had to end in your life created the specific space that your new beginning required. The clearing that felt like devastation was actually preparation. The emptiness that followed the ending was not meaningless void. It was sacred space being prepared to receive something greater than what it held before. God was already working before the ending finished. Here is something that will bring profound peace to your heart. Chosen one, if you allow it to fully settle in. God did not wait until your ending was complete before he began working on your new beginning. He was already building the new thing before the old thing had finished closing. Well, you were still in the middle of the loss, still processing the grief, still trying to make sense of what was happening. God was already on the other side of it, arranging, aligning, and constructing what was coming next. This is the nature of a God who exists outside of time. He sees the ending and the new beginning simultaneously. He is not surprised by the closing of chapters in your life, because he authored the entire book. He knows what comes after every ending because he wrote what comes after before you ever arrived at the ending itself. And because he works from that perspective of complete knowledge and perfect timing, he never wastes a moment between the close of one chapter and the opening of the next. While you were grieving the ending, God was positioning people who will be essential to your new beginning. While you were trying to find your footing in the disorientation that followed the loss, God was arranging circumstances that will make your path forward clearer than it has ever been. While you were wondering whether the future still held anything worth moving toward, God was filling that future with things that will cause you to look back at this season and understand with complete clarity why it was necessary. The new beginning was not improvised after the ending occurred. It was planned before the ending began, and the God who planned it has been working on every detail with the same faithfulness and intentionality that he has brought to every chapter of your story from the very beginning. The enemy overplayed his hand. Chosen one, there is something important you need to understand about the enemy's role in what you experienced. He did not simply observe your ending passively. He actively worked to produce it. He invested significant effort into the circumstances that led to the closing of that chapter in your life. He celebrated when it happened. He doubled down on the narrative of finality because he believed that if he could convince you thoroughly enough that the ending was permanent, he could keep you from ever stepping into the new beginning that was waiting on the other side of it. But in doing so, he made a critical error. He overplayed his hand, because in his eagerness to destroy what God had built in the previous chapter of your life, the enemy created the very conditions that God needed to build something far greater in the next one. In his attempt to close every door, he inadvertently cleared the path to the door that mattered most. In his effort to strip away what you had, he removed the very things that were limiting what you could become. In his celebration over what he thought was your defeat, he missed what God was already doing in the aftermath of the ending he had worked so hard to engineer. The enemy is not omniscient. He cannot see the full picture the way God can. He saw your ending and concluded that his work was done. But God looked at the same ending and saw the beginning of his greatest work in your life yet. And now, everything the enemy invested into producing that ending is being turned around and used as the foundation material for the new beginning he never saw coming. What the enemy meant for your destruction, God is using for your elevation. What was designed to finish your story is becoming the opening paragraph of your most powerful chapter. This is not wishful thinking. This is the consistent and proven pattern of how God moves in the lives of chosen hearts who refuse to let go of faith even when the evidence around them argues loudly for despair. What the new beginning looks like. Chosen one, as God turns what the enemy called your ending into a powerful new beginning, there are specific dimensions of that new beginning that are already taking shape around you, even if you cannot yet see the full picture of what is forming. The new beginning includes a clarity of purpose that the previous chapter could not have produced in you. Everything you walked through in the ending season stripped away distractions, dependencies, and limitations that were keeping you from the full expression of what you were created to be. The new beginning that is emerging is cleaner, clearer, and more aligned with your true calling than anything you were building before the ending came. The new beginning includes relationships of a different quality than those that populated the previous chapter. Some of the people who were part of your life in the season that ended were not meant to journey with you into what comes next. Their departure, painful as it was, created space for people who are specifically prepared and positioned to walk alongside you in the new chapter. People whose gifts complement your calling. People whose faith will strengthen yours. People whose presence in your life will make sense in ways that the departed relationships never quite did. The new beginning includes an authority and credibility in your testimony that could only have been earned through the valley you walked through to get here. You cannot speak with genuine power about resurrection if you have never experienced a death. You cannot comfort others in their endings with authentic hope if you have never stood in the middle of your own ending and found God faithful on the other side of it. The new beginning that is coming is not just a blessing for your own life. It is a platform from which your story will reach and restore people who are still trapped in the lie that their ending is final. Rise. Chosen one, there is a moment in every great story where the character who has been down must make the decision to rise. Not because all the circumstances have changed, not because the pain has completely passed, or the grief has fully resolved, but because something inside them recognizes that the story is not over, that there is more, that the ending the enemy declared was never the real ending at all. This is your moment, chosen one. This is the moment where you rise, not in your own strength, because you have already discovered through this journey that your own strength has limits, but in the strength that is made perfect in weakness, in the grace that has been sufficient through every season you have endured, in the faith that has survived everything the enemy threw at it and come out on the other side, still burning, still reaching, still believing. Rise and look at what God is building from the rubble of what the enemy called your ending. Rise and receive the new beginning that has been prepared for you with the same precision and love that God has brought to every chapter of your story. Rise and step into the open space that the ending created, knowing that the God who allowed the ending has already filled that space with something greater than what was there before. The enemy called it finished. God called it a foundation. The enemy called it over. God called it an opening. The enemy called it your ending. God calls it your new beginning. And when God speaks, what he declares becomes the only reality that matters. Your new beginning is here. Chosen one. It is already unfolding. It is already taking shape in the hidden places of your life, moving toward visibility with a momentum that nothing can reverse. The most powerful chapter of your story is not behind you. It is directly ahead, waiting for you to step into it with everything you are and everything you have become through everything you have endured. Walk into Italiano. The God who turned every ending in history into a beginning is turning yours right now. Type Amen. If you receive this declaration today, share this with someone who is still sitting in the middle of what the enemy called their ending and needs to know that God has already started building their new beginning.